Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taitu Heron. I'm a development specialist. I head the Women and Development Unit of the University of the West Indies Open Campus. I'm based in Barbados, and WAND is a specialized unit of the UA Open Campus, and we specialize in community outreach, public policy discourse, online programming, and applied research, and sometimes we do technical partnerships as well with different NGOs or other university departments, focusing on centering women in all their diversities in Caribbean development. So that's the short introduction.
Thank you. And now we'll have Chelsea, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this conversation. My name is Chelsea Foster again. I'm the founder and executive director of Girls of a Feather, which is a nonprofit mentorship and advocacy organization for adolescent girls between the ages of 12 to 17 years old.
Thank you so much.
In a nutshell.
And before we get right into it, I just would like to remind everybody that this session is recorded, okay? And the recording can be found on the Equality Bahamas' Facebook page. Now let's get started. Thank you so much, Taitu. You have the floor. Taitu? Okay.
Okay. All right, so basically, the presentation is going to address various things, but it's called Sex is Not a Four-Letter Word, Navigating Sex and Sexuality with Our Children and Why We Need to. Okay. So sex is not a four-letter word, as in fair. You know, why our parents are comfortable to talk about sexuality. Why do our children and youth need to know about sexuality, sex and sexuality? Looking at the rates, correlation between not having enough information and the vulnerability of children and youth in not knowing enough about sex and sexuality, and the rates of GBV and intimate partner violence, age-appropriate information and judgment-free information. How do we keep the communication channels open? And also I'm going to close with looking at available resources for our children and youth. So I want to start with a basic definition of sexuality. Sexuality is much more than just the act of sexual intercourse. It is an integral part of all of us. It is a dimension of our personality. It gives us an identity and the whole experience of what it means to be a female or male, or what it is in terms of how we, express and share masculine and feminine energies, and also to be open to understanding the iterations of expression in between. It involves our values, it involves thoughts, it involves feelings, it involves relationships. So why are parents really not comfortable talking about sexuality? They don't know what to say, they don't know how to say it, and a lot of that has to do with how they were raised in talking about sex when they were growing up. They might not know the answer, and they don't want to appear stupid, because parents are supposed to be the grand dictionary or the grand encyclopedia for our children. Talking about sex a lot, there's a perception that if we talk about it, we're giving children and young people permission to actually have sex. There's also the perception that, our parents, may not have spoken about it and we turned out okay. Another perception is that the child might be too young to learn about sex or sexuality. Or another perception is that we don't need to, because they think it will be dealt with in the school curriculum. And that's another area, but it's not a topic that is discussed in our culture and our religion outside of sex when, you used to have sex when we get married. So that's another perception. That, some parents say, well, we've taught them the basics, how to prevent pregnancy and diseases you know, focusing on the biological functions of the sexual organs, and they think that that is sufficient. Some will say they prefer to wait until the child asks. Another one, especially if it's a girl child, they'll say, let the mom talk to her about it. If it's a boy child, let the dad talk to him about it. Parents might be too embarrassed. You know, they don't know how to do it, how to talk about it. Another one is they themselves. You know, a mother or the father may have been sexually abused, and therefore any subject relating to sexual abuse is difficult, even if it is not. It's not a subject that they're really comfortable dealing with. But the thing is, because it's not a four-letter word, curiosity about sex is actually quite natural. People of all ages, especially teenagers, have a lot of questions about sex and sexuality. You know, and really in terms of looking at sexuality, it's an understanding of how our body works, and how to take care of it is a part of building what a healthy life, really. And accurate information about sex and sexuality is a good thing. We don't want to leave our children in a situation where they get misinformation, they don't get scientifically correct information, and they don't get information from a loving and nurturing place. So talking about sex may be uncomfortable, but ignoring the subject sends the wrong message, or a strong message to the child that it is actually taboo. And the underlying message also is that sex is something to be embarrassed about, and we want to actually avoid that. Because sex is really around us anyway. Unfortunately, we're living in a time where sex is highly sexualized, you know, and we want to be able to provide a safe space where we can balance the high sexualization in the environment, in sexual imagery, in movies, in popular culture, in music, and so on. So you want to be able to balance it and give a critical eye, and also add a much more healthier environment to sex, and addressing the inappropriateness of sex if it comes from a highly sexualized place. So the best thing that we can do is to ensure that sex is an acceptable topic that's open for discussion in your house, and that your child needs to know, even when you don't have all the answers, you'll provide a loving and safe space to wonder and to ask questions. So it can also be used as an approach to explore areas where you yourself have not gone. You may want to do it first, so that when you get to them, you sound like the expert. I've done that before. And then one of the main reasons is, another reason is that we have to be able to learn ourselves the information in an age-appropriate way, so that we don't give too little at the time where they need a little more, or we give too much at a time when they cannot understand it, right? What is the cost of ignorance and misinformation, and looking also at the reality of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. In the Caribbean, 3 of the top 10 recorded rape rates in the world occurred in the Caribbean. The average worldwide, while the average let me start over that sentence. While the worldwide average for rape is 15 per 100,000, in the Bahamas, for instance, it's had an average of 133. In St. Vincent, it had an average of 112. In Jamaica, an average of 51. In Dominica, an average of 34. In Barbados, 25. In Trinidad and Tobago, 18. So the prevalence is quite high. Across the region, there's about 48% of adolescent girls' sexual initiation was forced or somewhat forced. And that's really not a good statistic at all, right? According to UN Women, 1 in 3 women in the Caribbean will experience domestic violence, and over 1/3 of the region in UN Women's report, it reports incidents of intimate or sexual violence. The UNDP Caribbean Human Development Report for 2018 indicated that 30.4% of women in the Caribbean report high rates of fear of sexual assault in comparison to 11.1% of men. So the levels, if a third of the women in the region have a fear of sexual assault, it also gives you an indication of how understanding in our minds that the prevalence is quite high. That is something that we think about in terms of the possibility of it. Another thing to think about is also fertility. 1 of 5 live births in the Caribbean is to a teen mother. And between 2010 and 2015, the Caribbean adolescent rate was 30% higher than the global average. And almost half of Caribbean young people from 8 countries in the region do not demonstrate accurate knowledge about HIV prevention and transmission. So all of this is an indication really of the gaps in knowledge, that aspect of their education on sex and sexuality education is really not being sufficiently paid attention to, because it translates into mistakes, really. And it also translates into being far more vulnerable to gender-based violence, whether or not we have any control over it. So I want to get into, how do we then broach the subject, and the kind of value system and the kind of approach that we need in terms of dealing with it. We cannot abstain from educating our own children about sex and sexuality. The reality of it is that if we don't educate them, someone else is going to. They're going to get information from another source. So it is best that they learn their behaviors and attitudes modeled by other adults, from the media, especially the internet now, from pop culture and music, and certainly from their peers. So in a sense, the parent should really be the primary sexual educator before anybody else. In the same way that the parent is the child's first teacher, the parent should really be the child's first sexual educator, right? So, and study after study has also shown that sex education doesn't lead to an increase in sexual activity. What it does lead to is safer and more positive interactions, and in the future, it helps them to guide when and how they choose to make decisions about sex. And it also helps them to navigate the kinds of relationships that they engage into when they begin to develop feelings for other persons, when they begin to develop sexual attraction towards another person.
So you can talk about really quickly. Sorry, yeah. Taitu. So you would say the appropriate time. Do you think there's a time before they start, I guess, voicing their feelings? Do you think there's an appropriate time to then, I guess, be proactive in talking to them about it, or do you?
Yes. They're teachable moments. For instance, once they're in the toddler stage, they're going to start getting curious about their body parts anyway. Those are teachable moments, and you want to be able to use that as teachable moments and give them the right names. Don't call it a cookie. Don't call it a tuntun. Don't call it a tili. Give them the real scientific names of their body parts. The same way you teach a child about their eyes, ears, nose, mouth, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, whatever. Teach them the same thing with the body parts, with the vagina, the penis, the bottom, the breast, and so on. Another way, for instance, if you're if you're a parent that up to a certain point you might walk around naked with them, that is another option. Not all parents are open like that, but if you're not ashamed of the body and you walk around naked, or you shower and the children might be around while you're showering, they're going to ask you about your body parts, and you just explain it. You don't make it something that is, ooh, if you shroud it in fear, and if you shroud it in this space of mystery, it's going to affect their approach to it much later. So the healthier you can start a conversation or just explain basic things about body parts, the easier it is to, as they get a little bit older, to have more complicated conversations. I can go through the age appropriateness and the kind of information that's expected in terms of guidelines at each age group, but I'll prefer to do that a little bit later on when I get a sense of how old how old the children are for the parents that are online or for the caregivers online, because it's a lot of information. Each age group develops at a different stage and processes information differently, but that is something I can get into as well.
Okay.
So you may think that they're not listening, but they actually do listen. But sometimes they're not necessarily ready to hear you. So for instance, if you might be talking about sex, say at about 12, at the time when they're a little embarrassed about their body parts, when they're just entering puberty, it's like they're uncomfortable with their breasts, they're not sure about the pubic hair, don't worry, don't worry, they're listening, they might be pretending not to be, but they're actually listening, and they'll come back to you. So one of the things I wanted to, I don't know if we have time to get into it, but in much of our curriculums, especially some primary schools and some secondary schools, they have comprehensive sexuality education at the within HFLE, and it's not as consistent as we would like. So what I want to talk to you about is that because of that inconsistency, and because the teachers in our educational systems across the region are not comfortable with the pedagogy of teaching about comprehensive sexuality education, parents really do need to get more proactively involved in talking about sex and sexuality education. Like I said before, I still personally believe that the parents should be the primary sexual educator, but in the absence of when they're not, even the school system isn't adequately addressing it, right? And even though it is a direction that policymakers and advocates are pushing for it to be more comprehensively addressed in the education system, we cannot wait on the pace of the education system to catch up with the needs of our children. We have to proactively take that role, right? So, but still, in a general way, comprehensive sexuality education is recognized as age appropriate, culturally relevant, and providing scientifically accurate, realistic, and non-judgmental information. And it goes through several things, values, rights, culture, and society, understanding gender, sexual and reproductive health, sexuality and sexual behavior, human body and development, skills for health and well-being, and balance and staying safe.
Taitu, if you don't mind, I just wanted to bring in Chelsea really quickly. Chelsea from Girls of a Feather, and just ask how you approach this this topic with your group and your organization.
You want me to stop share or leave it?
Just leave it up. It's just wanted to engage in a kind of mutual conversation, just really quickly, how your approach is given what was just said.
Okay, sure. I'm going to turn the camera off so that we can all have Chelsea's attention.
No, you don't need to put the spotlight on me, please. I'll be very brief.
Really quickly.
It's an open dialogue from what I understand. So I've been taking notes as Taitu has been presenting. But our approach has been, of course, we're not technical facilitators of SRH, but what
Can
we
you
try
say what SRH is? Really
sexual and reproductive health.
Okay.
So we do, there are a lot of intersections when we talk about gender and gender-based violence and sexuality with the girls. So that's how we kind of approach it. But we also try to empower them. So since we work, we're a youth-led and youth-focused organization, we try to teach them how to teach others about, these components of advocacy and just increasing their knowledge and building their capacity as youth leaders. So essentially, that's how we approach it. So a lot of the things Taitu has mentioned, we try to use within our organization, but a lot of the times we get facilitators. So we introduce facilitators who have the experience and are comfortable talking to youth and can give them the tools and practical skills, to use in their everyday lives. But, yeah.
Are parents ever introduced in this kind of dialogue and teaching as we have in this particular session?
Not yet. Okay. Our sessions are primarily with the girls. So we haven't extended the invites yet, but I mean, it's something we definitely should be doing, because we noticed that, you know, when you go home, it's a different discussion. A lot of parents have different views about certain things, especially when we talk about sexuality, and talking about, you know, we haven't gotten into that aspect yet, but things like LGBTQ rights and everything like that. The whole comprehensive sex ed package. A lot of parents are not comfortable with that, like she mentioned earlier. So we kind of just keep it among ourselves and the girls for now, make it a safe space, and let them, you know, decide what they do with that knowledge.
Thank you so much for chiming in, Chelsea. We'll take it back to Taitu. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that intervention. I appreciate that, Maria. I'm taking the cue from Chelsea, and primarily our approach has been, we started we still do a lot of adults, and we also focus on girls. But one of the things we discovered, and we have shifted gears significantly, is when we're talking about sexuality and sex education, we also have workshops or training with boys, but we separate the two. And then we have an opportunity and we bring them back together again, because they do need different comfort zones to talk about it. And boys have different needs from girls in terms of, terms of understanding how to navigate these kinds of conversations, and also how to talk about their body parts. And so there's a certain amount of cautiousness, and we take when we, because, and why we have chosen to actually separate the groups. And then when there's a certain level, particularly at the later stage, that when they're about 16 to 18, we might bring them together. But we deal with both groups separately. Our approach is to deal with both groups, because, you know, girls don't have sex with themselves. Well, they can, but at a much later date in a different way. But, you know, in that early stage of learning about sex and sexuality, they're not going to have sex with themselves. They might be exploring, they're going to have sex with somebody else, right? So we prefer to actually ground it in both, so that there isn't a gap in providing information to boys, so that they can meet each other in hopefully, you know, on an even plane, if that is what their preference is. Or if there's another preference, then we're not leaving any age group out. But one, I totally get the centrality of focusing on girls, but in this particular area of sex and sexuality education, we actually focus on both boys and girls. So let me get back to some of the things that parents need to do in terms of their approach. The information should be helpful, not harmful, and that you want to, while you may want to postpone children from having sexual activity, and to act responsibly when they choose to, and you want them to be your go-to when they make that decision, right? And when I say when they make that decision, you know, the ultimate decision is to complete the act, but there are several steps before that. And it's not just about having sex, but having relationships, exploring intimacy. You want them to be open enough to have those kinds of conversations with you, because it is really not easy to navigate. And so you really want them to be your trusted guide. You want to be that askable parent. You want to be that parent that they're not afraid to come to. Mommy or daddy is not going to shut me down or tell me not to talk about it, or give me, you know, a judgmental approach because I'm asking these questions. So giving them too much of information too soon, in a sense, can be a myth, but I vacillate, because if you give them too much too soon, they won't understand what you're telling them, you know? So you really do have to make sure that it is age appropriate, yeah? Gender conversations matter because it comes up in sex, you know? So you have to be able to be aware of this, you know, what are some of the stereotypical things about sex, you know, that for instance, that boys should be in control of the sexual act or any kind of sexual intimacy, that girls have no desire unless it's directed by boys if it's a heterosexual situation. So there are different ways in which you have to be able to navigate that kind of conversation. Bring it up. You have to talk about gender as well. So it's a heavy learning curve for parents. But I think it is something, it's better we go through that learning curve as an adult where we're in a better position to process it than they go through that learning curve all on their own, right? So that's really what you want to combat. Let your children's questions guide you, right? If they're curious, they will keep coming back to you, and especially if you answer the questions when they do come up with accurate information, right? And then you also explain to them about, you know, how do babies come about, but you also talk about it's not the same thing as adult sex. So you want to be able to steer them away. You want to be able to talk to them about the science of how a new life is created, but you also want them to understand that it is still separate from sexual behavior. So you want to be able to separate the difference between sex for procreation and sex for pleasure, and have them to gain an understanding and an appreciation that sex is really supposed to be about pleasure. Most of the time, we don't have sex to have children. We don't. Every time we have sex, if we were really to have sex only to have children, we would be, well, we're overpopulated already as it is, but we would certainly have more children, right? So we have to, we need to make that distinction. And let's see, where am I? Okay. There are lots of do's and don'ts, right? And we have to, this is where we need to be conscious of where we learned about sex and how we learned about sex. We cannot start our conversations with don'ts. Don't have sex, don't get pregnant, don't get a disease, mind you get HIV. It does not work. What gets left out of the don'ts are the do's, you know? And we get, children and young people get a lot of don'ts all the time. So it doesn't help to tell them what they shouldn't do. It actually helps a lot more when you tell them what they can do and what is, you know, what is available to them to be able to do, right? What can they do to be sexually healthy with a partner that they care about? How can they decide whether or not a partner is interested in them as a person or just as a potential sex partner? What are the different ways they can address peer or partner pressure to be sexual? Those are the things we need to talk about with them, so that you can help them to decide along the course, whether it's holding hands, whether it's kissing, whether it's fondling, whether it's petting, whether, you know, you have to be able to help them navigate. So by the time they make that ultimate decision to go all the way, they've already figured out how to do. Another reason why it's important for them how to do or what to do, so to speak, is understanding consent, and that consent is actually a conversation. Age-appropriate information, age-appropriate communication. You have to be able to, I think someone might be trying to get into the room, I'm not sure. You have to be able to meet them where they are. If a child is asking you what does sex mean, right? You may wonder what the teacher meant, because it might be something as basic as line up by sex, but that's a very different thing, you understand? So you have to find out exactly what the question is and then try and give them the right answer. Be real about it, dispel all the myths and rumors, use simple language, but respect their curiosity and respect their intelligence. And don't talk down to them about it while you're talking to them. You have to be sex positive as well. I mean, Chelsea, you can pop in at any moment and, you know, give us an idea of how you approach this too. But you have to empower your children, let them know that they deserve to feel honored in their interactions, in relationships, to have their own space, to keep their friends, to feel good about who they are, you know, teach them to expect give and take, but in the end, that a good relationship helps you to give more of who you already are and feel even better about it. It's when you're talking to teenagers in particular, you need to let them know that they deserve to have great sex, you know, that discussing what is good about sex will help them to have positive standards by which they can judge their own sexual experiences. And this helps again with gender, because, you know, if I use my own socialization as something as my benchmark, which thank God I've deviated away from, sex was, you know, from how I was socialized, we were passive recipients of sex. We're just supposed to receive. We weren't supposed to be actively engaged, you know. So it's very important that you dispel some of those myths, that you let them learn very early that both men and women, both young, they're supposed to have an engaging, and they both have sexual desires, and they're supposed to be able to articulate those desires.
Chelsea, did you want to add anything?
Not really. I totally agree with that. But just going back to the point about like adults who aren't really comfortable with, you know, that type of conversation, it's not a frequent conversation talking to children about sex being pleasurable when we're trying to prevent them from having sex. So there's almost that, you know, how do we talk about that sort of gap where we talk about sex?
Yeah, for me,
it's almost like that's like, it will pop in, but it's not the main conversation. Like in this presentation, we're saying we need to have more of that, but there's not much of that where we talk about pleasure and sex with young people, because we don't want them to think it's such a good thing, you know? So yeah.
My approach is that they need to know that it is a good thing, but you need to also let them know that it is so good that it is worth waiting for.
I totally agree, yes.
You know, it's not something you can botch up. It's better you know, it is worth waiting for. It's worth developing the skills and the confidence about your body, and, you know, learning how to navigate consent. It is worth waiting for, because you want your quote unquote first experience of it, you know, to be a pleasurable one. Yeah. Yes,
totally agree.
Parents know this in terms of sex and sexuality education. Parenting has to be very critical, as in you have to really think critically and be conscious in this area. We have to be able to use the media, the good, the bad, and the ugly about the media. So you use topics that are presented in daily media sources. You have to use their own teen culture. Don't be afraid to get into their world, their songs that they hear all the time. Whether it's rap, whether it's dance hall, whether it's soca, whatever the genre is, sex is already there. So you go into their world, you know, and you engage in the topics. You have theoretical conversations about sex and relationships. So you have to also, and those are opportunities for teachable moments as well. You let them play their music in the car if you're that kind of parent. And because you can't really relate to it, don't close your ears off to it. You're going to learn something based on what they are listening to. All of those things are teachable moments. You might not like it because when you were much younger, you were listening. But remember that when you were much younger, you were listening to music that your own parents didn't like. Don't forget that. So you always have to go back to, you know, we were also teenagers or young people, young children at some point. We have to avoid proclamations and judgments, you know. Children will anticipate you're reacting to them in the same way, right, if they're in a similar situation. So, you know, if you're watching something on TV, or if you see a little video clip on TikTok or whatever, and they're showing it to you, or you see, don't make any judgments, be open-minded, let them express themselves first, and then you have the opportunity to have a conversation, set a record straight, you know, that kind of thing. You can also consider role-playing through a situation that's prevented on television. And it's again, you have to be judgmental in your thought processing, and it will give insight into your child's view of the world and give you the opportunity for your ideas to reflect on. Importantly, as adults, we need to live by example. If you have a good relationship, your children must see it. Yeah. Let them witness you and your partner having a disagreement and working it out. Let them see how you know, be affectionate with your partner in their presence. You know, those things don't always come naturally, but it is very important, because then they see positive examples around them of intimacy and so on. And those are benchmarks that will guide how they enter into relationships and the kind of standards that they will have of how they think they should be treated when they're moving in that direction. no, this thing is not cooperating and I want it to cooperate. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, teaching kids about sex doesn't mean that you're parenting without values, you know. This is something that always comes up, you know. They may have a different set of values, and if we're talking to them about sex, that we're condoning it or giving them permission. No, not at all, not at all. What we want to be able to do is you're giving parents opportunity to have follow-up conversations about the how and from what, right? And how to regulate impulses and urges and how to express their feelings and so on. And if they have a crush on somebody, for instance, and they really want to figure out how to navigate that, you help them with it. You really take the time and you help them with it, yeah? So it opens the door to have continued conversation about how to be safe and responsible when the adolescents begin to engage in intimate physical or sexual activities, even if you don't approve, because you know, as parents, you want them to focus on school, right? But if they choose, you still have to, you can't tell them not to have it. You know, you can guide them and encourage them and recommend them not to have it. But the bottom line is you can't monitor them 100% of the time. And if you put them in a space where you're telling them where they shouldn't or over monitor, they're going to hide and do it behind your back. And that's the worst thing you want to happen. Whereas if they're going in that direction, you can be a part of that decision. You know, my mother was very technical in terms of what I was, when I was in high school, learning about sex and so on. She went the biological approach, functions of the body, how, you know, getting pregnant and so on. But I
just wanted to add something in there.
Yeah.
In terms of when we have conversations. I think it's important for us to even discuss the double standards when talking to girls and when talking to boys about sex and sexuality. I think it's a huge issue in the Caribbean. We don't hold the same standards for boys as we do with young girls. And even in a recent report that was done in St. Lucia, an adolescent and equity report, there are literally no statistics on SRH data relating to young boys. They have everything on how many girls are pregnant, how much information they know about HIV or this and that, but there's very limited information as it relates to young boys. So we really need to be conscious of that when we're having, you know, these conversations with young men. You have them doing whatever they want in different households, but you know, in the West Indian, parents will tell their girls, don't come home pregnant, don't do this, don't do that. But for boys, it's just like a totally different thing. So I just wanted to bring that across in the conversation, you know, for parents and any adults in the room or persons watching to just be conscious, you know, of those sorts of things.
And I think that's a really good point, Chelsea. And I want to add to it, because one of the things that we have seen is that they encourage girls to delay having sex, but they don't encourage boys to delay having sex. They actually push them. So like, who are they having sex with? Right? You know?
Exactly.
So it's and there's boys should be delaying sex. What is a 14-year-old? That's my own personal opinion. What's a 14-year-old doing having sex? You know, but there's no cultural pressure on the boy child in terms of delaying sexual activity because he's in high school.
And then they're the ones, you know, your statistics show that young girls are being forced and whatever. So the boys at a very young age are being very curious, and they're trying different things in harmful ways, in very harmful ways. In the classrooms, they're using their phones, and it's manifesting in different ways as they get older. So it's really important to not segregate the conversations and to limit how much you say to young boys, the same way we talk to girls about, you know, sex.
And consent.
And consent, exactly.
Do they have it? How to get it? Do they, you know, and all those things. So let's continue. See, we also have to remember that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we really need to listen more than we talk, right? So we have to be the sounding board that helps teenagers come to their own decision about their sexual behaviors. And so that it also helps them to develop independent decision-making rather than learning by error, right? And then you ask, and you can find out about what your child is thinking when they're talking about their relationships or sexual experiences. You know, listen to what that means to them at that time. What it meant when I was a teenager is completely different to what it may mean now. There's a whole language, a whole lingo around sex and sexual activity that parents need to be tapped into. So the teen's level of understanding and participation may actually be appropriate for his or her development level. We have to really pay more attention to being understanding and not to judge. And it's also helpful to talk about their friends and their relationships. So we can be very chatty about more about their friends than about themselves. But in listening to what their friends are doing will offer some insight into how your teen, whether it's her or him, actually feels. We can't ask too many questions. You know, who is so and so, who you like. You hear them talk about one boy this month and then talk about another boy next. Don't stress it, right? You provide a respectful place for sharing what they're willing to share. Excitement about the first crush, you know, feeling valued, wanted, or desired by someone else in a very different way, in an intensely intimate. These are things you want them to be able to not to shy away from. You want to also keep it generic. You know, speaking generalities allows conversations about difficult subjects to move forward without getting anyone incredibly comfortable. This is more for the parents than for the children. They also don't want them to ask you about your sex life either, right? So you may want to give them indirect stories. It might be your story, you know. You can, if it's up to you, it's depending on your comfort level. Some parents are more open than others, but you want to use other people's experiences. You want to use your experiences. You can let them know, you know, of certain experiences when they were younger and other difficult situations that you may have heard of or you're very much aware of. So don't be afraid to discuss those things. Don't interrogate, especially if they're teenagers, because that's a very unusual period, you know. They're full of chat, right? But don't interrogate them about exactly what they did or did not do. Don't demand any details. They will give it freely. As long as you make sure that it is a safe space for them, they're gonna talk to you. They will tell you, I can guarantee you that. But when it is too judgmental, when it is almost like you're a detective about their sex life, they're gonna shut you out, and you don't want them to shut you out, right?
Going back to your previous point, Taitu, we have a comment, I guess, on a question in the chat, basically saying, you know, their understanding is that some boys are getting initiated into sex by older girls or women, and how this is being addressed. So going into, I guess, that pressure or influence from their surroundings, or who is influencing them to engage in these activities.
Right. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to talk about consent and sexual grooming separately because it's incredibly important in the adolescent years. I'm going to get to that. That has to be dealt with on its own. It's really important in this age group. More do's and don'ts. You have to be prepared for repetition. So again, it talks about being a parent that is conscious in your parenting in this area. So you're going to have to educate yourself. You're going to have to recognize that your own child's individual style. You're going to have to navigate your own feelings about sexuality, your own comfort zone, and you're going to have to expect to feel uncomfortable. So when you do feel uncomfortable, I think the important question you need to ask is, do you prefer to be uncomfortable yourself, or do you want your child to be in an uncomfortable situation that they don't know how to navigate? Answer the second one, and you go back and you sort out yourself and deal with your own discomfort first. So be the responsible parent, right? Don't think you have to know everything, right? We have to remember, I spend more time on adolescents because that is really where my specialty is in terms of sex and sexuality education. Adolescence is really for practice. That's when the body is going through a whole range of changes, you know, and it's a great time for learning about relationships, you know, and you know, so you also have to help them to learn how to, you know, how should you treat a girl, how should you treat a boy, you know, and in this age of social media, you know, there's a lot of gossip, there's a lot of so to speak, about between teenagers. So slandering and validation, those things become important. So you have to help them. There might be battle scars, you know, there might be rumors, you know, a girl may like Stacy and she might be shunned or being bullied because she likes Stacy and not John. So how do you navigate those things if you yourself have internal homophobia that you have not really processed, right? Or if a boy likes a girl and he happens to tell her and she doesn't like him back and she says something unkind, you know, and it ends up being on Facebook or not Facebook, their Facebook is for old people, you know, it ends up on IG or in Snapchat, right?
TikTok.
Or TikTok. So you have to be able to help them navigate those really tricky areas so that the confidence can be boosted, so that you can help that girl child know that, you know, not because you don't like the boy means you have to be unkind in expressing that you don't like him. You know, there are nice ways of letting people down, you know, because again, it goes back to socialization. In a heterosexual setting, the expectation is that the boy is going to approach the girl. But in the same way that the boy can approach the girl has the right to say, no, I'm not interested in you, right? But you have to be able to help them navigate those kinds of conversations. So if the interest is not mutual, that he won't feel as if he can't ask another girl that he might be interested in, you know?
I think that is also the other way around, specifically in Caribbean society, where, you know, if a girl says no or she doesn't mind him, then he is like, oh, well, I didn't like you anyway, that kind of thing. So if anything, that knowledge and acceptance and confidence within yourself, I believe, should also be taught, if so, even more so to the men, and how they interpret that rejection when approaching women.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it starts early. So the earlier we are able to really boost their self-confidence, you know, the better it is. And also, to me, we have to be able to insert the importance of being kind, you know, when we are navigating these kinds of, not everybody going to like you. That's the bottom line, you know. So we have to stress being kind, you know. And it's the same way a girl might like you and, you know, might not like you back. You know, you're going to diss the girl, so you're not interested. No, you still can be kind, right? Things that are hard are not without value. So that I started to address that, you know, learning from mistakes, learning them to develop and maintain healthy relationship skills, particularly in communication, protecting your children from trauma, and so on. The D word. Children don't like to disappoint their parents, right? So you want to be able to, while you want them to know when their behavior is dangerous or wrong, you need to make them very clear that it doesn't mean that you love them any less, right? Reassure them after your blood pressure goes down that you still want what is best for them, and you want them to find help when they need it, you know, and to come to you for that help. Avoid getting into situations where their fear of your disappointment or anger keeps them from coming to you when they need you the most. Be clear that safety is non-negotiable. Be very, very clear that their safety is non-negotiable. So you have to think about what your bottom line priorities are. That chances are nothing matters more than you, than their safety. Nothing matters to you more than their safety. So you have to be clear, you have to repeat it often, and you have to let them know that no matter what, you're there for them, right? Make sure that they learn about consent. You have to make sure that they know what sexual grooming is, particularly in the teen years, because these are the critical areas. And I'm gonna get to that just now. In a social media environment, you have to let them know that there's a code word that they can use to get your attention when they need to get out of a potentially dangerous or uncomfortable situation. This is, for instance, if teenagers go out on their own, like you drop them off at, you know, at the movies, or they take the bus somewhere together as a group, and, you know, something may be happening. You know, you don't want to have you may not have the means to have a big conversation, but if both of you have a code word that they can use, right? All they need to send you that WhatsApp message. You know what it means, you get yourself moving, right? Set a standard for protecting themselves from disease and unwanted pregnancy, regardless of whether or not you agree on their decision to have sex. So make sure that they can still come to you if something happens, because you don't want them to slip through the cracks, even if they've made a mistake. Okay? Let's talk about consent. A lot of us don't really understand it, even as adults. Yeah, but consent must be clear, and it is unambiguous and a voluntary agreement between participants to engage in a very specific sexual activity. It sounds technical, don't it? It sounds so boring when you read it like that, but it's really active. It's not passive. And, you know, so there are several things that we have to help them to understand. That silence is not consent. Flirting is not consent. Being in a relationship is not consent. You consent for one thing don't mean you consent for everything. So you might be consenting as a 15-year-old to kiss a boy or to kiss a girl. That don't mean you're consenting for everything else to happen. Right? Consent is really a conversation. Right? Dressing in sexy clothing is not consent. Remember, at that period, they're still figuring out what their style is. They're still trying to figure out how do they express themselves. You know, what clothes them like, them kind of things, and how much room their parents are giving them to express themselves in that way, right? So they might be experimenting with showing flesh in different ways, and that's fairly normal, you know. You, as a parent, you can guide what those boundaries are. You know, I can't tell you what those boundaries are for you. You also have to pay attention to things like consent and room for alcohol drinking. That's our next workshop altogether, you know, but the party scene is not as healthy as we would like it, because a lot of the parties have open bars, right? So you still need to be able to give them information about, if, you know, what is allowable at a certain age, whether it's past 16, you know, in terms of what are your standards for consumption of alcohol, right? If you do not have good standards for consuming alcohol, they're going to follow you. So if you're one of those parents that drink at home casually, they're going to follow you. If a family member or other family members are alcoholics, getting into alcohol is going to be part of their way as well. I can almost bet that, yeah. Saying that, what it means is that it opens up a vulnerable space for older people, for persons to take advantage of their drunkenness, right? But be that as it may, being drunk is saying no is not being drunk doesn't mean that you cannot give, is not a sign of not giving consent, right? If somebody's underage, that is not consent. Being afraid to say no is not consent. So all of these things you have to literally go through with your children, right? Making out, you know, and so on is not consent. Going to the bedroom is not consent. And I'll share a little story here. When I was growing up, I have a lot of brothers, right? And one of them had become sexually active before he had finished. He was in university, but like he just started university, and he had somebody a girl at the house and in his room, and the assumption was that they were having sex, and the housekeeper was there, and she found out, and she knew about it and so on, so she told upon him, you know, so it became dining table conversation that so and so brought a girl home, and my brother was like, "Mommy, we can't have sex with her in a car. We can't have sex with her in the bush. Where you want me to carry her? Where do you want me to carry the people that pick me?" And my mother was like, "Okay, rules, boundaries, and so on." Yeah? So those are the kind of hard conversations you have to have when they choose to have sex. Are you going to allow them to have sex in your house? Nobody wants that. But what do you prefer? Let them jack up a girl on a car, in a bathroom, in the bush, or do they have sex in a comfortable environment where they can be monitored, where they can be guided? You have to choose. Or importantly, where you know where they are. I know this is a difficult one, but you have to decide what is the worst case scenario. Knowing that your son or your daughter is having sex in the bush or in a car, or knowing that they're having sex in a bedroom. Pick, right? But even so, Another thing is, if it is in a bedroom, does that mean that, oh, it's in, you know, it's a safe space and you can take advantage because you have privacy? No, right? So sexual activity without consent is a form of assault. So you also have to be able to encourage that knowledge as well, right? Only yes is consent really. And consent is really about having an ongoing conversation about comfort levels and respecting boundaries and teaching your children what those boundaries are, yeah? You can get into that later. The next thing I want us to pay attention to, please, Chelsea, pop in when you're ready, is sexual grooming. It's very, very important, I think, for parents to understand sexual grooming and be able to talk about this difficult subject with children, because we have a pattern in the Caribbean where grown-ass men and grown-ass women prey on young boys and girls. And the environment is a lot of silence and complicity around it. Yeah. In some households, there's I know in Jamaica, for instance, there's this habit, I would call it a habit because it's historical, where the boy learns about sex from the helper, from the housekeeper. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, well, when you're done.
Okay. And you also have another, where sexual grooming is concerned as well, is you may have, sexual grooming is a situation where somebody, it could be a community member, usually somebody in the family, or a community member, or an older relative, or somebody in the area. It can be strangers as well, but it can be somebody in a position of authority, a coach, a teacher, a minister of religion. So it's usually somebody that has some amount of authority and who can develop trust and a relationship and an emotional connection with the child or a young person so that they can eventually manipulate, exploit, and abuse them. And it happens all the time. It's a major problem. A lot of teenage mothers become pregnant by some hardback man.
And that's exactly the case I wanted to, just discuss. We had a young girl who was referred to us from, an institution for young girls. She was under the care of, that organization, that sort of thing. She ended up leaving and got pregnant by the boyfriend of the sister of her sister. So you're being taken out of, that home, because whether it was because she kept absconding or they had reached their maximum capacity, but they can't keep the children there forever. So you left thinking you're in a safe space. That's the new household you're in. You end up developing this relationship with an older guy, and that's what your experience has now become. That's what you see as a relationship, thinking this is healthy. And someone mentioned the issue of statutory rape. Mm-hmm. When I told them that, well, this young lady is living in a household by this man and got pregnant by this man, they said, well, this is the home she's assigned, there's nothing they can do. And these are the issues that we tend not to address when we look at our juvenile justice system. And there was nothing they could do. She was under their thing. She was in another home now. She's no longer their responsibility. And she was underage at the time she got pregnant, and nothing was done. But the way that they looked at it was that, okay, he's caring for the child, so what do you do? Do you take the father away? This is where she has a home. She's, in a stable home environment. There's nothing we can do. And, these things are very concerning.
Right.
It's very, very concerning. So when we talk about sexual grooming, there are all of these, nuances in between. You find it in schools, you find it in the system, you find it in communities everywhere. Mm-hmm. And it's being normalized, So
I think it's been normalized for a very long time, And that's part of the problem. It's acceptable. We even have little phrases about it. In Jamaica, yeah, there's a little phrase. They say, when the grass starts to grow and the ball can kick. Here in Barbados, them say after 12 is lunch. All of those things are indications that there's a particular kind of predatory male perspective on preying on children and taking advantage. So instead of being protective, which is what we would want them to be, they're being predatory, right? And it is unfortunately normalized. For girls, one of the things that tends to happen is that some of the men will take advantage of their physical maturity, as in their body and so on, and the fact that their heightened awareness of their sexuality and their body, and assume that thinking that they know. So they know when they really don't know enough. And the men know that they don't know enough and they exploit that. And there is a way in which things like economic exchange favors, especially when they may not be coming from an economically sound environment. So providing credit for a cell phone, you know, giving them a phone, giving them clothes, help, because they're in a trustworthy situation with the family members or with friends of the family. They may be paying school fees, they may be contributing to their uniform, they may be paying, all of these things happen, right? So because they build a relationship with the family, there's a way in which it gives them room to then exploit them and have sex and sexually abuse them. And once they spend the time to develop trust, once they spend the time to manipulate the child into believing that it is a loving relationship, they will then gain control by coercion, blackmailing, threatening, or guilt tripping them into sexual activity. And then they'll convince the child, knowing very well that it is wrong, because they convince the child that it is a secret. And situations where sexual grooming happens, the kind of mindset trap that ends up in the children's mind is very difficult to extricate and really has a negative impact on the kind of sexual relationships and sexual behavior that they have once they get over or get out of the situation of where they're being sexually groomed. I won't get into that now, but there are stages of grooming. What I wanted to talk about is other sources, you know, because some of the parents, some of us are not comfortable with talking about sex, you know, when necessary, what you want to be able to do is to identify and encourage them to ask for help from another trusted adult, you know, another auntie. I'm an auntie, I'm one of those aunties, right? So it doesn't always have to fall on you, yeah? But be that as it may, still another thing is you have to also build your own toolkit, right? You can't assume that what you know now about sex is always going to be enough, because every child is also different. So you need to build a list of resources about sexuality that you think can offer you sound information and advice that then you can impart on your children. Consider keeping books at home, you know, and that support your values as well as provide accurate information. Find resources in your community, whether it's clinics or hotlines or specialists and support groups, yeah, in case your children need help. There's one more slide. It's not coming up, but it's supposed to come up soon. Here we go. How do we keep it healthy? The important thing in terms of keeping that relationship with our children healthy is that it is also an opportunity for us to expand ourselves and to exit our own comfort zones. We cannot raise our children in the same way that we were raised, because it's a completely different time. So we have to be able to grow or open beyond our own religious doctrines and also beyond the heteronormative stances on sex. And that, I think, is very important, because we have to, I know that a lot of us are socialized and are still, that is still the environment for a lot of our young people, that it is still going to be a heterosexual environment, you know, whereas while heterosexuality may be the dominant form, we still have other types of sexualities being expressed. And what are you then going to do when it comes up? What are you going to do if your child or your child's friend does not have that orientation? Who is not oriented to be straight? They're expressing a preference for something else, for girls or for boys. What are you going to do? Are you going to condemn them? Are you going to say you don't have information? What are you going to? So we have those kinds of things you have to really think through. In terms of the religious doctrine and the idea of procreation equals sex, we have to be able to expand that as well. We have to be able to expand the idea that sex should only happen in marriage, because the environment is changing, and you also want to be able to give them room to make those kinds of decisions themselves in a very responsible way. While that might be your preference, you still can push it as the preference, but you have to still leave room to, if they make a different decision, that you're not going to condemn them for making a different decision from what your preference is, right? So my last point is that you really cannot root sex in the four-letter word of fear. You cannot root it in shame, and you cannot root it in judgment, because it's not a healthy way for them to enter into relationships with. It's not a healthy way for them to learn intimacy. And it is really not a healthy way for them to come up with this, for them to understand that sex is really something that should be a pleasurable experience. So in all of that, the ideal parent is in talking about sexuality is understanding, to be fair, to be loving, honest, communicative, not to talk down to them, please not to be judgmental, be respectful, be responsible, have a good sense of humor, enjoy, and use it as an opportunity to spend time with them so that you become the askable parent, and also to be confident in what you know and what you're sharing with them. And that confidence, of course, is only going to be built when you do your own research as a parent. Be the conscious parent. So I have a list of resources here. I can share it with Equality Bahamas, and everybody else can get a copy of the presentation. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just before we end, because you went through so much on giving parents,
I was nervous that it was too long.
No, it was great. But just before we wrap everything up, I just wanted to appeal to Chelsea a bit. So Taitu, you gave a plethora of tips and understanding and communicating with our children. Chelsea, as you run an organization, how do you approach? Do you have any additional tips that you would like to give parents in how they communicate and how they broach this subject?
I think that a lot of times there are some parents who did not grow up in an ideal household, and they maybe did not have the best circumstances when it came to, starting families, etc., and they don't feel confident in talking about it, like Taitu mentioned. So I think it's getting past that. Like she said, sex is not rooted in fear, and it also has to do with fear of how much you think you're equipped to talk about. And I think that's where the challenge lies sometimes. And even with us being very conservative society, and religion plays a huge role in what we think we should be talking to children about. And just even relying heavily on the schools and not feeling very responsible to take that extra step. So in terms of tips, I don't think I have any, but I just think that we need to just be more conscious of the conversations we have with our children on that topic. So I think Taitu has all the resources, very good resources, and gave you all some great tips. So I don't think I have too much to add where that is concerned.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, we got so much information, Taitu. Thank you so much. Once again, we have Taitu Heron from WAND, and also Chelsea Foster gave us some additional insight from Girls of a Feather. And again, thank you so much. If anybody has any additional questions, sorry?
Yeah, I would love to hear. So if anybody has questions, just think if it's okay with you, Marielle, they could.
Of course.
But I see a question in the chat that I'm just seeing the question, how do we incorporate statutory rape? It's a very important question in the region because I want us to think about how we define rape in the law. Unfortunately, in most of the legislation in the region, with the exception of Trinidad, rape is still defined as penetration of the penis into the vagina. What this means, and it's because we also don't want to touch the buggery provisions in the Offenses Against a Persons Act. So what this means is two things. Girls are not protected from gang rape where instruments are used like a broom or a bottle. The other thing that is important is that boys are not protected from rape under the law. Because usually if they're raped, it's usually through in the anus, right? Our definition of rape in the law does not cover anal penetration. And it's a huge gap in the law. So it doesn't cover that. It also does not cover the idea that a boy child can be raped, because the only definition of it is penile penetration of a vagina. So if an older woman takes advantage of a child, right? It may not be penile penetration. It may be other types of sexual violation. Yeah. The boy child still is not protected because there's a certain amount of apprehension in how we look at what sexual assault is, because it still conflates sexual assault with sexual intercourse. Sexual assault is not sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse is something pleasurable in a consensual environment. Sexual assault is violation of the person using a sexual organ or body parts.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Right?
So we can understand the distinction, because that's very important.
The sexual intercourse occurs in a consensual environment. Both agree to it. Sexual assault is when violation of the person occurs using body parts or instruments, and it is not by consent. So the huge gap in the law exists where boys are not protected from sexual assault. So it also goes, these difficult conversations have to be had with children. Them have to know them law. I mean, you need to know what the law says, but you also need to let them know, right, that there are ways in which they should be protected, that there are ways in which there are gaps. It's up to you if you want to tell them about the gaps. I personally think you must let them know about the gaps, right? But they also need to know that they have a right not to have sex under conditions that are not pleasurable or consensual. And remembering that the age of consent in the Caribbean is 16. Yeah? And here's the trick. A lot of them know there's a gap between 16 and 18. They know. A lot of older adults know. So that there's a way in which duress can come about. You get consent by coercion. And that's where the hardback man them and woman them come in. They know that the age of consent is 16. So between 16 and 18, that's the period in which you can wear a teenager down and entice them with a whole heap of other things, where the grooming unfortunately takes place. Yeah. So you have to be able to arm them with the right kind of information. Yeah. I'm going to end it there. I don't want to end on a bad note. Sex is great.
The two consulting adults. Yes, thank you so much once again. I hope you guys learned a lot. I sure did. This was a great session. Just thank you so much. Please, again, this is Taitu Heron from Women in Development Unit, or WAND, and Chelsea Foster from Girls of a Feather. We'd also like to invite you guys to like Equality Bahamas's Facebook page. I believe some links should be coming in the chat soon. IG page. There's also another event next week. Well, there are events all through. There's an event tomorrow, all through for the 16 days of activism. But next week, specifically on Saturday, is a discussion for healthy relationships and online safety, specifically for teens. So this particular session was directed towards parents, Next week's session on Saturday will be for children or adolescents that have that space for discussion. And I see the link is now in the chat box. But again, tomorrow there is for International Women Human Rights Defenders Day. There's also going to be discussion there. All of the links to register for these sessions are going to be on Equalities Bahamas Facebook page, Instagram page. Please don't be afraid to visit all of these pages. And again, there are events through this whole week. Feel free to find out what is interesting to you and what you feel would be helpful to you and your community. The links to all are in the chat here. And don't forget to visit, don't forget to visit 16 days.
Sorry about that.
On the link, sorry. 16dayscampaign.org. 16dayscampaign.org. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much, everybody. Hope you enjoyed and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
A couple persons have asked, but